My topic for the Autism Forum is transitional services for individuals with high functioning ASD, and I'll focus on employment and education. So for this presentation, I'll focus on the state of Minnesota. I will have some information for North Dakota as well, but it's going to focus mainly on Minnesota. Okay, so first we'll talk about Section 504. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is a national law that protects qualified individuals from discrimination based on their disability. So then schools can actually make accommodations through this section and are required to do so if needed. So transitional services for youth and young adults can begin at age 14 and are offered through schools and then in coordination with vocational rehabilitation services. Okay, so some of the accommodations that schools can provide after high school. So there can be accommodations for college placement tests, which would be taken in high school but for college, such as the AccuPlacer or the ACT. And then for graduate tests, there's the GRE to get into graduate school and the Praxis as well. So they can provide accommodations for those tests. And then I'm going to use MSUM as an example. It's not a pitch for MSUM, but I think that it's just good to provide a specific example to see how maybe some of these accommodations work. But all schools are going to provide probably pretty similar accommodations. But anyway, you can request accommodations. So for things like testing, the individual may be able to go to a different room to take their test or to get maybe an extended period of time. I think that's a big thing too with an individual with autism. If there's some sensory needs there, it can be very distracting to take a test with a big group of people. I know I've taken a few classes where there's 200 people in an auditorium, and maybe those are things of the past. Now, at some point, I think that they'll get back to those, but it's very distracting when you have all of those people in one room and you hear pens clicking and people flipping their papers and people walking up and down the stairs of the auditorium to turn in their tests. There's just a lot going on, and for me, it was very distracting. So for an individual with autism, I would think that would be very tough too. Also, you can get a note taker. So then if the individual, they won't have to focus on taking notes and trying to listen to the speaker as well. So they can maybe just listen and they can not have to worry about doing both. Also, there's alternate textbooks. And also there's modifications for housing just to make that environment the best possible that it can be for the individual. Okay, now we'll move into employment. So Minnesota is an employment first state, and so employment first means that raising the expectation that all working age Minnesotans with disabilities can work, want to work, and can achieve competitive integrated employment. And each person will be offered the opportunity to work and earn a competitive wage before being offered other supports and services. Okay, so for Minnesota, this is not an exhaustive list of all the resources that are out there, but I went through the actual stages to see what services that they offered. And again, there are more local programs too, but this would maybe be a good starting point. So that would be through vocational rehabilitation services, and that's through the state, like I said. So the first step would be counseling. So the individual will be assigned a counselor that works with them throughout the entire process, and they determine strengths, interests, needs to reach goals, and they also maybe talk about what would be a good fit for them for a job and what would not be a good fit for them. What do they like? What do they not like? And then they develop a plan to meet those goals, and that could vary too depending on the individual. Some may need more support in writing that plan. Others might do so more independently, but they're going to work together to develop that plan in some capacity. The next is training. So this could be on-the-job training or more formal classroom training. And then there is also some assistance with some educational expenses as well that can be done. All right, so next step would be the job search. And in addition to before discussing maybe some interests and what would be a good fit, this would be a good time for the individual and the counselor to discuss things as how much money they need to make to be able to pay their bills, and maybe what type of insurance that they would need. Scheduling, I think too, if it's an individual with autism, maybe you don't want to put too much on to them. You just kind of know what would work best for them. So then do they want to work part-time? Do they want to work full-time? And also support needed on the job. They want to make sure that that process is successful and that they have what they need so they can complete their duties. And then the counselor will also make sure that the individual knows how to look for a job and then do things such as, doing the application, making a resume, working on interview skills. And if they can't provide that, they will arrange them to meet with somebody that is trained to teach how to do those tasks. All right, so after the individual gets the jobs, the counselor will keep in touch. So it's not just a process where, they get the job and then they kind of cut the ties between the two and then they're just on their own. They will keep in touch to make sure things are going well and then to assist with learning the job duties, to improve quality and quantity of the work completed, and then solve any problems, and then so they can work productively. So that if there's any issues at their employment, they can work with them to make sure that those problems are solved so then they can be an effective employee. Okay, so I only talked about options for education and for employment. This other side, there is also aspects for like some of the other supports and services and also for living too. So this kind of gives for Minnesota like kind of a good overall picture of services that are out there for these different areas, not just for employment and education. So I think that's a good overall picture. And there's a link for that on the bottom if you're interested in viewing that. Okay, so for North Dakota, I didn't go in depth here because we're just for lack of time, and it would just be the topic would get to be too large. But I wanted to touch on this a little bit since we do live kind of in a border city. So there are similar employment services that can be offered through North Dakota Rehabilitation Services. So there's vocational counseling and planning, and then there's also some employment maintenance, and then vocational training, and then there's also that's supported employment too after somebody gets a job, and they can also help you with job placements, and then again they're going to follow up on that just to make sure everything's going smoothly for the individual. Okay, so this was focused mostly for individuals with autism that are higher functioning. So if it's for a person that has maybe some higher needs, there are some options locally. So the first one would be Heartland Industries, and they're in a few different cities, but also in Moorhead. So they can offer more continuous supervision and direction to the individual, and maybe in an employment setting. So if they need maybe constant supervision, this would be a potential option. And they also offer some day camps too that are not in employment, but there are options that they can go and experience different things and to be with the group. And then also for community living services in Fargo, they have a day supports program where they actually have some vocational volunteering. And then also they have different groups as well, such as exercise groups, there's some cooking groups, they can go on some day trips, things of that nature. How this presentation was focused on higher functioning autism, but I wanted to include this too. So if there's an individual that has some higher needs, that there are some other options as well. And lastly, this is my take home. If we were in person, I would have this as like a trifold pamphlet type thing, but this is just basically some resources that I use for the presentation, and also ones that if you had any questions that you could contact. So there's your more employment links over on this side, you have education, and then you have contact information. If the sites provided phone numbers and emails, I try to include both. There was one that just had a phone number listed, but it's for the Minnesota Department of Human Services, the MSUM's accessibility resources, and there's vocational rehabilitation services for Clay County, and there's also the number for North Dakota Human Services for vocational rehabilitation. And then here's a first page of references, and here's my second page. And all right, that'll conclude this presentation. Thank you for watching.